of nights, like nowhere else on BBC iPlayer.
Would you say I'm your best friend?
No.
No?
No, I don't mean it like that.
No, it's fine. I thought you might take a bit long to think about it.
No, but am I yours?
No.
Well, there we are.
No, you might have been.
If what?
If you'd said I was yours.
Staged Series 2. All episodes streaming now on BBC iPlayer.
Now on BBC One, time for the lunchtime news with Sean Lay.
Top 74.
Hello, good afternoon. The government has insisted that its new travel measures will protect the public from variants of COVID-19. Air corridors are being closed from Monday, meaning visitors to the UK will have to quarantine. There have been fresh calls from the travel sector for support to help the industry survive. Here's our business correspondent, Katie Austin.
Last summer, they were seen as a lifeline for travel businesses, keeping people going on holiday. Travel corridors mean people coming into the UK from a certain list of countries don't have to quarantine upon arrival. Right now, though, we're being told to stay home and the system is being suspended.
To protect us against the risk of as yet unidentified new strains, we will also temporarily close all travel corridors from 0400 hours on Monday.
That means arrivals from anywhere will have to quarantine for 10 days or pay for a COVID test on the 5th day when they can leave quarantine early if it's negative. This also applies to Eurostar and seaports, but not people travelling within the UK or Ireland, or some jobs like hauliers. Groups representing the travel industry, already battered by coronavirus restrictions, accept the need for rules to tighten, but are asking where things go from here.
We're saying to the government that they need to look at all of the measures that they've got in place for travel at the moment and all of those restrictions, and to actually come up with a plan to move forward so that when restrictions are start to lift, that there is a clear plan in place.
There have been renewed calls for targeted support for aviation and aerospace. The aviation minister accepted the announcement was bad news for them.
The most important thing for all of the travel industry is that we're able to get people out and about travelling again safely as soon as possible. And it's what we're doing with the vaccine, the massive rollout of over 3.2 million jabs. That's what offers the real prospect of better times for the aviation industry and the whole of the travel industry.
Strong bookings for later in the year by the over 50s were providing some optimism, but for many in the holiday industry, the light at the end of the tunnel looks a little more distant than it did. Katie Austin, BBC News.
Toughened lockdown restrictions have come into force in Scotland due to a rapidly spreading strain of COVID-19. Further measures have been brought in to stop the spread of coronavirus and limit non-essential contact. Live now to our Scotland correspondent, Alexandra Mackenzie. Alexandra, what can you tell us about the restrictions that come in today and the impact they're likely to have?
Well, much of Scotland is already in lockdown, but now those restrictions have got even tighter. If you go for a takeaway coffee or food, you won't be allowed inside. They will serve you either through the hatch or out on the street. And also, if you do click and collect, there's fewer items that you can now order via click and collect, only things like what they're calling essential items. You'll have to go and make an appointment to collect them, and that will also be done outside. Now, the overall message from the Scottish Government is to stay at home unless it's absolutely essential. And there's also some concern about an outbreak of coronavirus on the island of Barra. Western Isles has described this as serious and escalating. There have been 27 cases identified and many more people are self-isolating.
Alexandra Mackenzie in Glasgow, thank you. India has begun the world's largest vaccination drive. The programme aims to vaccinate more than 1.3 billion people against COVID. India has recorded the second highest number of infections in the world after the United States. And in the United States, President-elect Joe Biden has set out details of his plan to immunise 100 million Americans in his first 100 days in office, which begin with his inauguration on Wednesday. He said mass vaccination centres will be opened with people over 65 2025 considered a priority. The United States has recorded far more coronavirus deaths than anywhere else in the world. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes reports.
In a city where officials believe 1 in 3 of its population has been infected with COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic, there's a sense of urgency. Hospitals in Los Angeles are overwhelmed. Here, someone is dying from the virus every 8 minutes.
It's rough to see people who are really sick, and we have to tell them there's not much we can do. We can take you to the hospital, but to sit on these gurneys, it's not comfy.
The race is on to get as many people vaccinated as soon as possible. This is the car park at Dodger Stadium, the baseball venue in Los Angeles that's being transformed into the largest vaccination site in America. By the middle of next week, officials say at least 12,000 people a day will receive the COVID jab here. But it isn't enough.
We've got to increase the pace and distribution in the administration of these vaccines. The reality is we need to get these vaccines out of the freezer and we need to get them into people's arms.
This is a scene that's playing out around the country, around the world. But America's so-called Operation Warp Speed has failed to live up to its name, at least as far as distribution of the vaccine is concerned. Joe Biden says when he takes over from Donald Trump on Wednesday, he'll launch an ambitious plan to roll it out fast. He said efforts so far had been a dismal failure.
Our plan is as clear as it is bold. Get more people vaccinated for free. Create more places for them to get vaccinated. Mobilize more medical teams to get the shots in people's arms.
He's promising 100 million jabs in 100 days, 100 mass vaccination centres around the country, and mobile units to get into areas that are hard to reach. The president-elect also had a blunt warning for Americans, things he said would get worse before they get better. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Well, within the last half hour, Uganda's long-time leader, Yoweri Museveni, has been declared the winner of the country's presidential election. Mr. Museveni has held the post since 1986. Uganda's Electoral Commission has dismissed allegations of vote rigging made by the opposition candidate Bobi Wine, a former pop star. Dozens of people were killed during violence in the run-up to Friday's election. The UK, France and Germany are warning Iran against carrying out work on uranium metal-based fuel if it wants to preserve the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. It comes as the United States, which pulled out of the deal under President Trump in 2018, imposed new sanctions on companies dealing with Iran in the final few days of his presidency. Prince William has spoken about the impact of seeing death and suffering whilst working as an air ambulance pilot. In a video call with emergency responders and counsellors from Hospice UK's Just Be bereavement support line, the Prince said he could understand the immense pressure frontline staff have been under.
A lot of the people, a lot of the public don't understand that when you're surrounded by that level of intense trauma, sadness and bereavement, it really does. It stays with you at home, it stays with you for weeks on end, doesn't it? And you see the world in a much more slightly depressed, darker, blacker place.
You would have been involved in...
Now, with all the sport, let's join Catherine Downs at the BBC Sports Centre. After you, Catherine.
Thank you.